I want you to calm down and take a deep breath because today's story is really special. Relax, inhale deeply, and get ready to dive into an amazing tale. Tonight, we were cracking open one of those gritty chapters of American history that is equal parts survival, grit, and sheer stubbornness. You're about to step into the worn, dusty boots of a hobo during the Great Depression. Spoiler alert, you probably wouldn't survive this journey. No shade, most people wouldn't, but that's what makes this story so compelling. Quick thing before we dive in. If you enjoy these stories, hit like and subscribe. It really helps me out and helps this new channel reach 50K subscribers this month. Drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. I love picturing you all scattered across the map, each with your own little glow of light in the dark. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Let's slip into tonight's journey together. The wooden slats of the boxcar floor vibrate beneath your legs. The train lurches forward, groaning like an old beast, and you grip the cold iron edge of the door just to stay upright. The landscape blurs by. Brown, barren fields, skeletal trees clawing at a grey sky, shacks leaning into the wind as if they've given up hope. The year is 1932. The Great Depression has wiped out more than just bank accounts. Say it's chewed up lives, pride, and the certainty that yesterday's paycheck meant tomorrow's dinner. And now, here you are, part of a hidden, wandering army of men and women crisscrossing America, not by choice, but by sheer necessity. This is your initiation into the life of a hobo, not to be confused with a tramp or a bum. A tramp sometimes works, but mostly avoids it. A bum doesn't move at all. But a hobo? A hobo is a worker on the road, someone who trades sweat for stew and grit for survival. It's not glamorous, not even close. But there is a strange kind of dignity to it, like being the underdog who refuses to stay down. And as the train rattles through the dark, you feel that resolve settling deep into your bones. You're poor, dirt poor. But you're moving. And in a world that's come to a standstill, movement means you still matter. Your first night on the rails, hunger gnaws at you like an animal. The last scrap of bread is long gone, and the only thing sharper than the cold wind cutting through the boxcar is the emptiness twisting in your gut. That's when you notice them, two men crouched near the opposite door. Their bedrolls are patched and stained, testimony to countless nights spent under rain and dust. One of them grins, flashing gaps where teeth should be, but not lacking in charm. Without a word, he reaches into his coat and tosses you something. A shriveled apple, bruised, soft. But to you it gleams like treasure. You bite into it, and in that moment, you're no longer just a lone drifter. You've been quietly welcomed into a brotherhood, the unspoken fraternity of the road. Here's a bit of history to ground this scene. During the peak of the Great Depression, over 250,000 teenagers took to the rails as hobos. Some fled abusive homes. Some were cast out by families who couldn't feed them. Others chased rumors of jobs always just one town over. Whole generations carved their stories into the wooden ribs of freight cars. You're never truly alone out here. Just a few boxcars away, someone else is sharing the same hunger and the same hope. But here's the quirky part. Hobos didn't wander in complete chaos. They built a language. Like wizards leaving hidden spells, they scattered symbols across America, chalk swirls on fences, carvings on gateposts. This was the hobo code. A circle with two diagonal lines. Get out quick. This town isn't friendly. A rough cat shape scratched on a post? A kind woman lives here. She might feed you. She might. Imagine it. A secret map stretching across the country, invisible to most but vital to those desperate enough to read it. Once you've seen the marks, you start spotting them everywhere, like breadcrumbs left by unseen hands. Scholars still debate what hobos truly represented. Were they free spirits, proof of resilience and defiance, the last romantics of the rails, living by no man's rules? Or were they victims, stripped down to scraps of dignity, forced to chase survival wherever it flickered? Maybe they were both. And as your journey unfolds, you'll walk that line yourself. Night falls. The train rattles on, wheels singing a rhythm that's half lullaby, half warning. Stars glitter overhead, cold and distant. The two men swap stories in low voices, whispers of places where work still exists. Picking fruit in California, canning fish in Oregon, cutting lumber in Michigan. To you, it sounds less like gossip and more like a treasure map, each town a fragile pin of possibility. You know some of these rumors will vanish into smoke, but you'll chase them anyway. Sleep comes hard. The boxcar floor is as unforgiving as concrete, every bump knocking your bones together. But eventually exhaustion wins. You dream not of wealth, but of stew simmering in a dented tin pot, the smell of onions, the miracle of warmth. Out here, even your dreams adapt to survival. Dawn breaks. Frost clings to your blanket like silver threads. The two men are gone, slipped out at some dark station while you dozed. You're alone again, but not lonely. You've shared food, shared silence, shared the road. You now carry something with you, not in your pockets, but inside. The rails stretch endlessly ahead, a silver thread pulling you deeper into the story. The first lesson isn't about food or shelter. It's about signs, not heavenly omens, but the chalk marks and scratched symbols that stand between safety and ruin. Walking a dirt road at the edge of a small town, every porch feels like a gamble, kindness, or a shotgun. Then you see it, a looping X etched near a gatepost. Your pulse steadies. You've just discovered the Hobo code, an underground internet built from chalk and whispers. The marks are subtle by design. A circle with an arrow pointing left. Move on quickly. The law is watching. A triangle with 2 dots inside. Suspicion ahead. Tread lightly. Across, religious home. Bread, likely offered here. A cat symbol. A kind-hearted woman lives here. Some marks warn of danger. Vicious dogs, hostile police, bad food. Others promise refuge, a safe place to sleep, a pump with clean water. To the untrained eye, it's nothing. To a hobo, it's a survival map. Some men become so skilled they can read an entire town's soul by its chalk marks alone. Here's a curious fact. Back in 1889, long before the Great Depression, hobos held their first national convention in Britt, Iowa. They still do it today. Parades, speeches, even a king of the hobos crowned every year. It's proof that hobos weren't just nameless drifters. They were a nation within a nation. As dusk deepens, smoke curls from a cluster of trees ahead. Not chimney smoke, campfire smoke. You've stumbled upon a hobo jungle. Don't picture wild animals. This jungle is a makeshift village, shacks pieced together from tin sheets and tarps, fire pits glowing in the dark, an improvised city hidden along the rail line. A stew pot hangs over the fire, bubbling with whatever scraps went into it that day. Beans, potatoes, maybe a sliver of ham if fortune smiled. Your stomach growls loud enough to earn a chuckle. Someone hands you a dented tin cup and ladles out a scoop. The broth is thin. The first sip tastes bitter. The second sip tastes like mercy. Food here is more than calories. It's currency. It's hospitality. It's proof that even in the leanest times, people still carve out little islands of generosity. Historically, hobo jungles weren't random. They sprang up where trains slowed just outside towns. Some lasted a night. Others became semi-permanent. Regular residents, fire pits, communal tools. Hidden cities stitched together by barter, rumor, and trust. Some even had designated chefs, hobos famous for making something edible out of almost nothing. One might season with wild herbs, another swore by throwing coffee grounds into the pot to stretch the flavor. But here's the question. Were these jungles true communities, or just temporary shelters where every man ultimately stood alone? Some historians call them families of necessity. Others claim they were fragile illusions, with theft and fights just beneath the surface. Sitting by the fire, you see both truths in the flicker of flames. Music softens the night. A man strums a battered guitar, singing a song equal parts sorrow and humor, an ode to canned beans so vivid you almost laugh. Laughter mingles with smoke, momentarily pushing hunger aside. And then you notice children. A boy of 10 chasing sparks with a stick. His mother stirs the stew, her face worn but fierce. Families are here too, proof that hobo was never just the caricature of a lone man with a bindle. Widows, veterans, orphans, whole households displaced by banks and dust storms. The word hobo begins to feel less like a label and more like a net catching everyone who fell through society's cracks. As night deepens, the stories rise. A man claims he rode from Georgia to Montana without touching the ground. Another brags of dodging a railway bull so cleverly the officer tipped his hat in respect. You know most of these tales are stretched thinner than the stew, but no one cares. The storytelling itself nourishes. It feeds a hunger food alone cannot reach. You lie back, staring at the ember sparks spiraling like tiny lanterns into the night. Far off, a whistle wails. The rails are calling again. Tomorrow, you'll shoulder your bundle and keep moving. But tonight, here in the glow of the jungle fire, you belong. For a few fragile hours, you're part of something larger, a society stitched together not by wealth, but by will. A quiet rebellion against vanishing without a trace. By dawn, the fires are dying. The jungle scatters like smoke on the wind. And once again, the rails stretch ahead, an endless silver thread pulling you deeper into the story of survival. Men roll their bedrolls into neat cylinders, and the stew pot is scraped clean. You sling your own bundle over your shoulder and fall into step with a small group heading toward the farms outside town. Survival tonight will depend not on stew or chalk marks, but on whether you can trade your hands for food. Work is the closest thing to currency you carry. You arrive at a farm where rows of corn sway in the breeze, stalks tall and proud despite the economic chaos gripping the country. The farmer eyes you and your companions from the porch, arms crossed. His face is carved by both sun and suspicion. This is the moment of truth. Will he see you as a worker or a vagrant? You keep your eyes steady, your posture straight. Finally, he jerks his chin toward the field. "Hoe those rows and there'll be supper," he mutters. That's it. The contract sealed without paper, ink, or dollar bills. Here's a historical anchor. During the Great Depression, thousands of hobos earned meals or temporary shelter through what was called work for food. Jobs ranged from chopping wood to harvesting crops to scrubbing barns. It wasn't steady employment and rarely paid his money, but it kept bellies from collapsing in on themselves. Many farmers, themselves struggling to make ends meet, preferred a few hours of labor in exchange for food rather than turning men away entirely. Now for the quirky fact. Some hobos became known as professors of odd jobs, skilled at everything from sharpening knives to fixing clocks. If you happen to have a knack for mending fences or playing the fiddle, you might score more generous treatment. There are stories of hobos painting entire barns, with brushes cobbled together from horsehair, or crafting toys for farm kids out of scrap wood. You realize quickly that every skill, no matter how strange, has a chance of feeding you. Yet historians debate whether this exchange was fair or exploitative. On one hand, hobos gained food and a brief sense of dignity from honest labor. On the other hand, many were underpaid or rather not paid at all, sweating through hours of backbreaking work for nothing more than a crust of bread and a place in the barn hoft. Was this generosity from farmers or a clever way of wringing labor from the desperate? As you swing the hoe through stubborn soil, your aching arms lean toward the latter. By dusk, your shirt clings to your back, damp with sweat. Your hands blister, but the farmer's wife sets out supper on the porch. Cornbread, beans, a sliver of ham. You eat slowly, savoring each bite, like it's a feast fit for kings. The children stare at you curiously from behind the screen door, whispering to each other as if trying to puzzle out why grown men have to beg for work just to eat. You swallow the last crumb with a lump in your throat and muss, realizing the answer is more complicated than they'll ever want to hear. After supper, you're offered the barn loft. The hay scratches at your skin, but the smell of cut grass and the low snuffles of horses feel almost luxurious compared to the boxcar floor. You watch the moonlight spill through the gaps in the wooden walls and think about how many hobos have lain in this very loft, staring at the same slice of sky, wondering about tomorrow's meal. The road ties you all together, strangers linked by the rhythm of work, food, and movement. Before sleep claims you, you whisper thanks to the farmer under your breath. Not because the system feels fair, but because it's survival. Out here, gratitude isn't about justice. It's about still having the strength to walk away in the morning. And when the rooster calls you awake, the rails are waiting again, stretching toward another town, another porch, another chance to prove that your hands can still buy you bread without a single dollar in your pocket. Your next stop isn't a farm, but the quiet neighborhood of a small town tucked along the tracks. By now you've learned that hunger doesn't give you the luxury of pride. Begging isn't about theatrics. It's about reading people, watching for a flicker of kindness in their eyes before you even knock on the door. There's an art to it, subtle and strange, and if you get it wrong, you could end up with nothing. Or worse, a sheriff escorting you out of town. You stand at the edge of a dirt road lined with whitewashed houses, your stomach rumbling loud enough to make you self-conscious. Which door will it be? The Hobo code helps. There's a faint chalk mark on a gate shaped like a cat. That symbol whispers, "A kind woman lives here." You smooth your hair, straighten your patch shirt, and practice a smile that says, "Honest, hungry, and harmless." Knuckles against wood. Your heart thuds like a hammer. Here's a fact to keep you grounded. Many hobos learned to follow an unwritten etiquette when begging. The rule was to always ask politely, offer to work in exchange, and never overstay your welcome. Hobos even coined the term bumming a meal, which became part of American slang. Those who were rude or greedy risked spoiling it for everyone else, since towns grew wary quickly if too many wanderers abused generosity. Now, the quirky side, hobos passed around tips like trade secrets. They claimed widows were more generous than married couples, or that knocking Reich around supper time made your chances better. One tale insists you should always pet the family dog if invited in. It shows you're trustworthy. Some even carried the battered Bible, not for devotion, but because quoting a verse or two might open more doors. You realize this is more performance than pleading. It's a craft, and the stakes are as high as life itself. Scholars argue, though, about the psychology behind these interactions. Was the act of begging merely about food, or did it reveal deeper dynamics of shame, power, and charity during the Depression? Some historians suggest that household generosity toward hobos reflected a shared understanding. There but fortune go I. Others believe it exposed resentment, as struggling families resented being asked to feed outsiders when they themselves had little. Standing on a stranger's porch, you feel that tension buzzing in the air, invisible but sharp as a knife. The door cacks open. A woman in her 50s, apron dusted with flour, peers at you. You tip your hat and clear your throat, offering to chop wood or sweep the yard in exchange for a bite to eat. Her eyes narrow, then soften. She doesn't ask for work this time, just hands you a plate with a biscuit and a thin slice of ham. You thank her, your voice cracking a little. For a moment you both stand there silently, an unspoken understanding passing between you. She's one bad harvest away from standing where you are now. Not every door is like hers. Later, you try again, knocking on a different house marked with no symbol at all. A man answers, face hard, words sharper. "Get off my property before I call the law." The door slams, and the echo rings in your chest, louder than the hunger. That's the danger. You never know which version of America will open the door, the kind, the cautious, or the cruel. Back at the jungle that evening, you share your day's haul with others. Half a biscuit, a handful of apples snagged from an orchard. You listen as fellow hobos swap advice, each story reinforcing how thin the line is between surviving and starving. One man swears the trick is to sing a hymn when they open the door. Another insists you should carry an axe, so your promise to work feels less like a metaphor. Everyone's got a strategy, and none of them guarantee success. As the fire dies down, you reflect on the peculiar dignity and begging done right. It's not groveling, it's bargaining, offering trust in exchange for mercy. Tomorrow you'll try again, knocking lightly, hoping the right person answers. Out here, every meal is a gamble, and you're betting your hunger against the kindness of strangers. Night after night, town after town, your clothes are starting to tell your story before you even open your mouth. The fabric is thin where it should be thick, patched where it should be whole, and fraying at every edge. You glance down at your shirt, noticing that the collar has been stitched in 2 different colors of thread. Somebody else's hands worked that repair long before the shirt ever belonged to you. That's the thing about a hobo's wardrobe. Every garment has already lived several lives before it finds its way onto your back. Walking through town, you pass a dry goods store with a shiny new pair of overalls displayed in the window. The price tag may as well be a joke. $2, a sum that feels as distant as the moon. You keep moving, knowing full well you'll be relying on hand-me-downs, donations, or whatever cast-offs you can scourge. Hobos even had a system for trading clothes in jungle camps, like a swap meet without money. If someone's shoes didn't fit, they'd pass them along. If a shirt was too ragged, it might get cut into rags for bandages. Nothing ever truly went to waste. Here's the historical anchor. During the Depression, second-hand clothing became the backbone of survival, not just for hobos, but for millions of struggling families. Thrift shops run by charities like the Salvation Army thrived, offering garments for pennies or free. Hobos, often excluded from even those opportunities, relied heavily on what they could barter, scavenge, or mend. Clothing was as much about utility as modesty. A sturdy coat meant you wouldn't freeze to death on a boxcar ride in January. Now for the quirky fact, hobos were oddly proud of their ability to patch clothes. Some even stitched patterns or initials into their garments as a kind of signature. A well-done patch could spark conversation around a jungle fire, almost like showing off tattoos. And then there were the uniforms of the road. Overalls, wide-brimmed hats, bandanas tied, just so that created an unspoken dress code. You could spot another hobo from a mile away, not by their face, but by the language of their clothes. Scholars, however, debate what these clothes really represented. Were patched garments symbols of resilience, proof of resourcefulness and creativity, or did they serve as marks of shame, broadcasting poverty and exclusion from mainstream society? Some historians argue that hobos developed a kind of counter-fashion, a culture of practicality that rejected middle-class values. Others claim these clothes only reinforce stigma, making it harder for hobos to blend in and find work. As you run your fingers over the rough patches on your sleeve, you feel both truths pressing down. Pride in survival, but also the sting of being marked as less than. Later in camp, you sit beside an older man whose coat looks like it's been sewn together from 3 different others. He laughs as he describes how each patch reminds him of a different town. "This piece," he says, tapping a square of faded red cloth that came from a kind widow in St. Louis. "And this blue stripe swapped it off a fellow in Denver after his boots gave out." To him, his coat is less clothing than a scrapbook stitched together of the road. That night, you notice how the firelight plays across the group, highlighting the odd mix of garments. Some men wear coats too big for them, cinched with rope. Others have pants rolled high because they were found too short in the first place. A pair of shoes is passed around the circle, each man trying them on like Cinderella's slipper, until one man's feet finally match. The laughter that follows isn't about fashion, it's about relief, the simple joy of something fitting for once. You bed down in your own patched clothes, wrapping your coat tight around you as the night grows cold. The fabric smells faintly of smoke and sweat, but it also carries the memory of every stranger who wore it before you. You drift off, wondering if years from now someone else will wear your patched shirt, adding their own stitches, their own story to the fabric of survival. The rails give you freedom, but they also give you enemies. Tonight you're not thinking about stew or patched clothes, you're thinking about railway bulls. These are the men hired by the railroad companies to keep people like you off the trains. They don't wear fancy badges, but their authority is carved into every bruise and broken bone they've handed out. You can smell their presence long before you see them. The sudden hush in a jungle, the way hobos slip into shadows when a flashlight beam cuts through the night. You crouch low in the weeds near the siding, waiting for the freight to slow enough to climb aboard. Your heart hammers as the wheels squeal against the track, sparks flying into the dark. Just as you move, a shout cuts through the noise. "Hey, off there!" A bull's silhouette emerges, broad-shouldered baton glinting under the lantern light. Your instincts scream, "Run!" And so you do, crashing through weeds, breath tearing in your lungs, every step echoing with the thought that you might not get away. Here's the historical reality. Railway bulls were notorious during the Great Depression, and their brutality was well documented. Railroads were private property, and companies considered hobos both a nuisance and a liability. Bulls were paid to keep them off, often with violence. Broken ribs, cracked skulls, and even deaths weren't uncommon. Yet hobos kept coming, risking life and limb for the chance to ride steel across the country. Now for the quirky fact, some bulls developed reputations almost as legendary as the hobos themselves. There were stories of bulls so cunning they could sniff out a hobo hiding under a train, and others so mean they'd take your shoes just to teach you a lesson. But there were also tales of bulls who looked the other way if you kept quiet. or who'd let an old-timer ride in peace as long as he didn't cause trouble. Like everything else on the road, it came down to luck, and luck didn't always favor you. Scholars still debate whether bulls were simply enforcing law and order, or if they represented something darker, the policing of poverty itself. Were they protecting railroads, or were they punishing desperation? Some argue that bulls became symbols of a system that criminalized survival, turning hungry men into fugitives. Others see them as inevitable products of a chaotic era. Rough men hired to keep rough order. Either way, when you're sprinting through the dark, none of that matters. All that matters is the pounding of boots behind you. You dive under a fence, scrape your arm on barbed wire, and don't stop until the lights of town fade behind you. When you finally collapse, chest heaving, you realize how close you came to being caught, or worse. You lie there in the grass staring at the stars and wonder how many hobos never got back up from a chase like that. Later, by a jungle fire, the stories flow thick and fast. One man swears he saw a bull toss a kid off a moving train. Another brags about outwitting a notorious bull by hiding in a water tower for 2 days. The tales get taller with every retelling, but the fear underneath is real. Everyone's got scars, visible or not, from encounters with men whose job was to remind you that survival had consequences. As you roll into your blanket that night, the sound of the rails in the distance makes you twitch. You know the trains are both salvation and threat, highways to freedom and hunting grounds for bulls. Tomorrow you'll climb aboard again, because you have no choice. But tonight, lying in the dark, you can't shake the image of that lantern flashing, that shout cutting through the night. The road gives, but it also takes, and the bulls are there to make sure the balance is always a little cruel. The day after your run-in with the bull, you find yourself walking with a limp, still sore from your sprint through barbed wire. Hunger pushes you forward. But what steadies you isn't just the promise of another meal. It's the knowledge that you're not alone out here. You're beginning to understand the road has its own family. A brotherhood stitched together, not by blood, but by dust, smoke, and steel rails. They call it the brotherhood of the road. And once you've shared stew from the same pot, you're in whether you like it or not. You first sense it around a campfire that evening. The men greet you without suspicion, offering a seat and a tink as though you were expected all along. No one asked where you're from or what you've lost. They already know the story. It's carved into your face the same as theirs. Instead, they talk about tomorrow's trains, yesterday's towns, and rumors of work 2 states over. You realize quickly that out here, information is as valuable as food. Knowing which station has a lenient bull or which farmer pays with ham instead of cornbread can make the difference between surviving and starving. Here's a historical anchor. The Hobo Brotherhood wasn't just a poetic idea, it was a functioning network. Hobos shared resources, taught each other the hobo code, and even looked out for the young or inexperienced. At its best, it worked like a grassroots safety net during a time when the official safety nets of government and society had failed miserably. And the quirky side, hobos often referred to each other with nicknames instead of real names. Around the fire, you might meet Lonesome Dan, Iowa Red, or Boxcar Benny. These names carried their own mythologies, earned through deeds, quirks, or just plain accidents. Sometimes the names stuck longer than the real ones, so much so that men could forget what they'd been called back when they had permanent addresses. You can already feel your own nickname bubbling up, though you're not sure what it'll be yet. But scholars question just how deep this brotherhood went. Was it true solidarity, or just a fragile alliance born of necessity? Some historians describe it as a powerful fraternity of outcasts who built a parallel society. Others argue it was more transactional, with friendships dissolving as quickly as they formed once the stew ran out or the train whistle blew. Sitting there with the fire warming your face, you wonder about that yourself. Will these men remember you tomorrow? Or will you be just another shadow in the endless parade of wanderer? Still, you can't deny the comfort of it. One man notices your limp and hands you a scrap of cloth to bind your leg. Another offers advice about catching trains from the south side of town. Less heat that way, he says with a grin. It's generosity that comes not from abundance, but from shared scarcity. Out here, the only thing anyone has to give is what they can't afford to keep. And yet they give it anyway. Give it. As the night deepens, the conversation turns to philosophy. One man insists hobos are freer than anyone else in America, "No boss, no landlord, no mortgage," he says, puffing on a bent pipe. Another shakes his head, pointing out that freedom isn't worth much when your belly is empty. The debate hums under the stars, unresolved but important. A reminder that even men with nothing still wrestle with the meaning of it all. You fall asleep with your back against a wall, listening to the chorus of snores around you. For the first time in days, you don't feel completely exposed. The fire, the laughter, the murmured plans, they weave a net around you, fragile but real. You know the Brotherhood won't stop the bulls from swinging their clubs or guarantee your next meal, but it offers something just as vital. The sense that you're not walking this endless road alone. You wake to the smell of wood smoke and something unexpected. Music. A man across the campfire strums a guitar so beaten it looks like it survived 3 wars in a tornado. Yet it still breathes sound. The strings buzz and twang, but the melody floats into the morning air with surprising grace. Music in the hobo world isn't decoration. It's medicine, history, and rebellions wrapped in 6 strings. You sip from a dented tin cup of coffee and let the sound soften the edges of your hunger. The song drifts from sorrow to laughter, each verse blending truth with exaggeration. One line mourns a sweetheart left behind. Another cracks a joke about sleeping in a pigsty and calling it hotel accommodations. Around the fire, heads nod. Some lips join in on the chorus. The music binds you tighter than any patchwork of clothes or stew could. For a few minutes, everyone forgets about the bulls, the hunger, the endless road. Instead, the jungle feels almost like home, one built on rhythm, rhyme, and resilience. Here's a historical fact to ground it. Hobo culture was steeped in music. Songs like Big Rock Candy Mountain captured the mix of longing and humor that defined the life. Hobos carried harmonas, fiddles, and guitars, turning every jungle into a kind of folk concert hall. Their music spread through America, weaving into the fabric of folk and blues traditions that would influence generations. Now, the quirky side. Instruments weren't always real instruments. Hobos made fiddles out of cigar boxes, banjos from pie tins, even percussion with washboards or spoons. One man tells you proudly how he once strummed wire nailed between 2 boards, claiming it sounded just like Nashville if you squint your ears. You can't help but laugh, but when he plucks a tune, the rhythm does in fact get your foot tapping. Out here, invention matters as much as talent. Yet scholars still debate what this music really represented. Was it escapism, a way of forgetting hunger for a few precious minutes? Or was it a form of protest, a coded language that turned suffering into art and solidarity? Some argue these songs were survival tools, keeping spirits alive in the face of despair. Others suggest they were more myth than reality, circling with the image of the singing hobo romanticized after the Depression ended. You sit back and wonder, does it matter? The music in your ears is as real as the smoke in your lungs, and that's enough. As the sun climbs higher, the camp grows lively. A harmonica joins the guitar, and soon a fiddler cuts in with a tune sharp enough to make everyone laugh at the squeaky notes. A circle of men clap along, stomping their boots in rhythm. Even the weary faces of the children brighten. The jungle, usually grey with exhaustion, suddenly glows with energy. You feel it too. The music pumping something warm back into your veins, reminding you that the joy can exist even in the harshest corners of life. When night falls again, another fire sparks up. This time, a man with a voice like gravel tells a story between songs, weaving music and narrative into one. He sings about riding boxcars through rainstorms, about tricking bulls, about finding a nickel and buying a meal big enough for 3. The younger hobos lean in, hungry not just for food, but for identity, for the sense that they're a part of something larger than their own footsteps. As you lie down later, the echoes of guitar strings linger in your ears, mixing with the distant wail of a train whistle. You close your eyes, realizing that music is more than sound out here. It's survival disguised as melody, hope disguised as rhythm. And tomorrow, when the road calls again, you'll carry those tunes with you like a secret weapon, humming them softly as the rails rattle beneath your feet. You're riding the rails again when you hear whispers about a figure that sounds half man, half myth. The Hobo King. Every community has legends, and in the hobo world this one reigns supreme. Around jungle fires and trainards, names get passed like smuggled currency. Stories of a drifter who could outwit bulls, charm farmers into feasts, and navigate the country without ever going hungry. Whether he was real or just stitched together from campfire imagination, the king became a symbol of the road's dream. Survival elevated to art. Your first real brush with the legend comes when an older hobo called Missouri Jack tells you the tale. He swears the king once rode a single boxcar from Chicago to Los Angeles without once being spotted, hopping between cars like a phantom. Another man interrupts, insisting he met the king in St. Paul, where he supposedly negotiated free pie from a bakery just by tipping his hat. The stories contradict, overlap, and grow taller with each retelling. But no one around the fire doubts the king's existence. It's as though the myth is too useful to abandon. Here's the historical truth. The title Hobo King wasn't just campfire chatter. At the annual National Hobo Convention in Britt, Iowa, a real king of the hobos was crowned. Men like Steam Train Mike Graham wore the crown as symbolic leaders of the wandering tribe, giving speeches about the dignity of hobo life. The coronation added ceremony to a culture that otherwise thrived on the margins, a reminder that even drifters could create traditions of their own. The quirky side. The Hobo King sometimes took his duties surprisingly seriously. Accounts tell of kings mediating disputes between hobos, lobbying for better treatment, or even representing hobos in conversations with curious townsfolk. Some wore patched robes or carried homemade scepters as symbols of their rule. Imagine it, a man with holes in his boots, giving a regal wave as other hobos cheered like loyal subjects. Ridiculous maybe, but also oddly moving. Scholars, of course, question whether the Hobo King represented anything more than spectacle. Was it genuine leadership or just pageantry meant to ease the sting of poverty with a dose of theater? Some argue the king gave hobos pride, reinforcing the sense of belonging in a society that otherwise rejected them. Others claim it was just a distraction, a temporary fantasy in a life defined by the struggle. As you listen to the campfire stories, you lean toward the first view, even if the king never held real power. Belief in him gave men something priceless, a reason to keep going. Later that night, a younger hobo with soot on his cheeks leans close and whispers, "I saw him once. He gave me a sandwich in Kansas City." You nod, though you don't know whether to believe him. A fire pops, decks flying upward, and the thought lingers. Maybe the king is just a role anyone can play. Maybe every act of kindness on the road, sharing stew, handing it to him off a coat, strumming a guitar, is a crown passed from head to head. When you finally curl into your blanket, the legend of the Hobo King follows you into your dreams. In them you see a man walking the rails with a crooked crown and a patched robe, leading an invisible parade of the forgotten. Whether he was real or not, you realize something important. Survival on the road isn't just about food or warmth. It's also about stories. Myths that make the cold nights bearable and remind you that even nobodies can be kings, if only in the flicker of a jungle fire. The train lets you off near a town where the air smells faintly of yeast and coal smoke. Your belly twists, reminding you that it's been too long since your last full meal. You follow the line of men shuffling toward the church basement on the corner, drawn by the promise of food from the soup kitchen. Here, the difference between being a hobo and being just homeless sharpens. A hobo, you remind yourself, is a worker on the road. But when you stand in a line that stretches around the block, the every label blurs into the same hungry silence. The building's steps creak under your boots as you file inside. The smell of cabbage soup hits first, watery with just enough fat to leave a shimmer on top. Volunteers ladle portions into chipped bowls, their faces a mixture of kindness and exhaustion. You grip yours tightly, retreating to a corner to eat. The first sip burns your tongue, but you don't care. Around you, men slurp quietly, some staring into their bowls like they are ashamed to look up. Hunger doesn't just gnaw at the stomach, it eats at pride. Here's a historical anchor. Soup kitchens became lifelines during the Great Depression. Churches, charities, and eventually government relief programs fed millions. Some lines stretched for blocks with men waiting hours for bread and coffee. The most famous kitchen was in Chicago, run by gangster Al Capone of all people. He served thousands of meals a day, partly as public service, partly as a calculated PR move. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The law couldn't provide, but an outlaw could. Now for the quirky detail. Some soup kitchens had reputations that spread like rumor hers among hobos. St. Mary's serves meat on Fridays, someone might whisper by a jungle fire. Others became known for stingy portions or for sermons longer than the meal. Hobos developed strategies. Arrive just before closing when volunteers were more generous with leftovers, or stand near children to soften hearts. You realize quickly that even soup lines have their politics, their own invisible rules to navigate. But scholars argue over what these lines represented. Were they symbols of communal resilience, evidence that Americans pulled together in crisis? Or were they proof of systemic failure of a society that forced its citizens into queues for watery broth? Some historians emphasize the dignity volunteers tried to preserve. Others focus on the humiliation endured by those who had to stand there day after day. Sitting with your bowl, you feel both truths sting at once. When you leave, you step into the sunlight with a full stomach but an emptier sense of self. The line is longer now, winding down the block, and you catch a glimpse of a man who looked just like you. Worn boots, patched coats, eyes darting toward the ground. Some are hobos who'll hop the next freight. Others are locals who once owned stores or farms but lost it all. Hunger has leveled the playing field, erasing the old borders between wanderer and townsman. Back at the jungle, the talk circles around the difference between hobos and the bums who stayed in soup lines all day. One man insists hobos still have pride because they trade labor for food when they can. You don't join the debate, but inside you know survival doesn't wear neat labels. Pride is easy to talk about, harder to chew on when your stomach is empty. That night, as you bed down, the smell of cabbage soup lingers in your mind. It wasn't much, but it kept you moving, and that's the whole point. Tomorrow you'll chase another rumor of work, another porch, another chalk-marked gate. The line between hobo and homeless may blur, but for now your boots still walk the rails, and that movement feels like the last fragile thread tying you to dignity. You've learned that maps aren't always drawn on paper. Out here they're carried in the minds of hobos, pieced together from scraps of rumor, half-truths and first-hand tales swapped by the fire. Tonight you sit with a circle of men tracing invisible lines in the dirt. One points west, saying there's orchard work in Washington. Another swears there's a canary hiring in California, though someone else snorts and calls it a lie. The debate rages on, but the truth doesn't matter as much as the hope. Each story becomes a compass needle, pointing you toward the possibility of a meal. Walking the rails, you realize how quickly memory becomes your greatest tool. You remember which towns had kind kitchens, which farms offered work, and which streets wire of hostility. The map unfolds in your mind, not drawn in neat lines, but in vivid impressions like the smell of biscuits baking near a house with a chalked cat symbol, or the sound of boots on gravel where bulls once chased you off the siding. No atlas could ever capture these details. Here's your historical anchor. During the Depression, hobos truly did rely on oral maps. They traded intelligence about jobs and safe routes, the way merchants once traded spices. Even government relief offices often spread information unevenly. So hobos became their own news network, passing word from rail line to rail line. Some historians argue that this web of memory and rumor resembled a primitive postal service complete with relay points at jungles and trainards. Now for a quirky fact, some hobos were so skilled at remembering routes and resources that they became unofficial guides. They'd lead groups of younger wanderers through towns, showing them which back doors to knock on or which bridges had the best hiding spots under them. A few even claimed to know shortcuts across states by following specific freight schedules, as though they carried invisible timets in their heads. You wonder if your brain will one day be as cluttered with landmarks that no mapmaker has ever written down. But scholars still debate the reliability of this oral geography. Were hobos genuinely mapping America in their minds, or just chasing endless chains of exaggerated rumors? Some researchers say these memory maps were precise, refined over years of first-hand experience. Others argue they were more like folklore tales, blending fact and fantasy, until the truth blurred beyond recognition. When someone insists there's steady work in the next town, do you trust him, or is it just wishful thinking passed along like a game of telephone? You test the system yourself. Following the advice of a man named Kansas Pete, You head north to a town where supposedly the bakery sells Dale bread for pennies. Sure enough, the rumor holds true. The baker's wife hands you 2 loaves, smiling as though she's in on the secret. Later you follow another tip about easy train hopping outside the rail yacht. That one, however, nearly lands you in the grip of a bull's club. The road teaches you fast. Trust the map, but trust your gut more. One evening, sitting near the fire, a hobo scratches in the dirt with a stick, trying to draw an actual map of the Midwest. Others crowd around, arguing over which town is east of which, voices rising as the lines tangle. You laugh quietly, realizing the map isn't really the point. What matters is the act of remembering together, of building a shared knowledge that makes the vast and different country feel just a little smaller. When you curl into your blanket that night, the rails hum faintly in the distance like strings of a giant instrument, vibrating under the stars. You close your eyes and picture the mental map you're building. Dots of kindness, dashes of danger, paths carved from memory. It's not precise and it won't keep you safe from every bull or every hunger bang. But it's yours, and it's growing with each mile that you walk. In a world where you own almost nothing, that map feels like treasure stitched directly into your mind. The rhythm of the rails teaches you something quickly. Hunger has its seasons. In summer and fall, the air smells sweet with possibility. Orchards ripe for picking, fields heavy with grains, canneries buzzing with the clang of tin. In winter and early spring, though, the land feels barren, and so does your stomach. Tonight you sit by the fire, chewing slowly on a piece of dried bread, while older hobos swap stories about the months that can make or break a man. During harvest time, the road almost feels forgiving. You remember stumbling into an apple orchard in Oregon, the trees bending low with fruit. The farmer shouted at first, but when you offered to pick, he shrugged and handed you a basket. That day you ate until your belly ached, apple juice sticky on your hands, pockets stuffed with extras for the journey. For a moment, the depression felt like it couldn't touch you. Nature was too abundant to care about Wall Street. Here's the historical reality. Seasonal agricultural work was one of the biggest lifelines for hobos. Migrant labor drew thousands westward, especially to California, where fields of lettuce, grapes, and cotton promised temporary salvation. Whole families followed the harvests, living in tents or makeshift shacks near the fields. But the work was grueling, the payoff in pennies and competition fierce. Still, it kept people alive when factories shut down and cities offered nothing but soup lines. Now for the quirky side, hobos sometimes developed their own menus of seasonal travel. Spring meant heading south for planting. Summer meant orchards in the west or wheat harvests in the Midwest. Autumn meant cotton or corn. Winter meant desperation, cutting firewood, shoveling snow, or just clinging to whatever scraps could be found. Some hobos even sang songs about the calendar of the road, as if hunger itself had scheduled appointments. But scholars debate whether this migration was freedom or bondage. Some describe it as a nomadic lifestyle that allowed hobos to chase opportunity across the country, an echo of frontier independence. Others see it as exploitation, cheap disposable labor shuffled from one crop to the next with no stability and no future. As you hear men argue around the fire, one praising the open road, another cursing the fields that left his back twisted, you realize both sides hold weight. You recall a darker season, winter in Minnesota. The fields were bare, the snow relentless. You huddled in a boxcar with 3 others, trying to keep warm with shared breath and the faint heat from a candlestick. Food was scarce, and even the soup kitchens had more mouths than bowls. That season carved itself into your bones. You learned that hunger doesn't just gnaw, it freezes. Bum stove freezes, stiffens, and leaves you dreaming of orchards you may never see again. In contrast, harvest seasons glitter like salvation. You remember another camp, this time in Iowa, where hobos boiled corn in a black pot until the kernels popped off in sweet bursts. The jungle smelled like roasted grain, laughter mixing with the steam. A younger hobo, barely 16, grinned with his butter smeared across his chin, proclaiming it was the best feast of his life. In that moment, you saw how a simple crop could turn strangers into a family, at least for one golden evening. As you bed down tonight, you think about the strange bargain the seasons demand. Nature offers her gifts, but only when she chooses, not when you need them most. To survive the road, You learn to move with her rhythms, following the crops, dodging the famine. Hunger, you realize, is not just about empty pockets, it's about time itself. Whether you arrive in the season of plenty or in the long, barren stretch when even the earth seems to say no. The road doesn't just test your stomach and your feet, it tests your conscience. One cold evening, as you crouch behind a grocery store, staring at the crate stacked by the back door, you feel the question press on you like a weight. Do you take what you need, or do you walk away hungry? Out here, the line between stealing and surviving blurs until you are not sure which side you're on anymore. You remember the first time you crossed it. A half-rotten loaf of bread sat on top of a trash bin, barely edible, but your hands shook as you grabbed it. The guilt hit almost as hard as the hunger. Later, you learned there were unwritten rules. Don't take from people poorer than you. Avoid stealing if honest work is possible, and if you do swipe something, make it small, just enough to get by. Yet rules don't fill a belly, and desperation rarely cares about morality. Here's the historical anchor. Crime rates during the Great Depression did rise, but not always in the ways you'd expect. Many hobos committed what authorities called petty theft. Food, clothing, or coal swiped from trains. Railroads even reported whole carloads of coal mysteriously lighter by the time they arrived, thanks to men tossing lumps off to stash along the tracks. It wasn't about riches. It was about staying alive through one more night. Now the quirky fact. Hobos sometimes used humor to soften the moral sting. They'd joke about borrowing bread from the baker or liberating a chicken. One tale tells of a hobo who left IOU notes when he swiped apples, signing them the hungry traveler. Whether true or just a tall tale, it shows how even theft became part of the storytelling culture, wrapped in wit to make survival sound less like sin. But scholars debate whether hobos were criminals by necessity or simply scapegoats for wider societal failures. Some historians argue that the stereotype of hobos as thieves was exaggerated by newspapers eager for headlines. Others claim theft was common enough to blur the distinction between survival and crime. Was society punishing genuine wrongdoing, or just the audacity of being poor in public? As you tuck that half-rotten bread into your coat, you feel the weight of both sides, guilty and justified all at once. One night in a jungle, you listen as men swap their own borrowed goods stories. One brags about sneaking a pie off a windowsill, though others laugh and say, "No pie ever sat that conveniently." Another confesses to hitching a ride on the back of a milk truck, sipping cream straight from the bottles until his stomach ached. Each story dances between shame and pride, survival and sin. But the darker tales slip in too. A man whispers about being caught swiping from a store and beaten by both the owner and the bull before being dumped outside of town. Another describes watching a friend shot at for stealing chickens. The laughter quiets and everyone stares into the fire. The road may forgive theft, but the world often doesn't. As you curl under your blanket that night, you wonder what kind of man you're becoming. You don't want to be a thief, yet you also don't want to starve. The rails hum faintly in the distance, carrying you toward another choice, another moral test. Out here, survival means learning to live in the grave, where every meal comes with a question you don't always want to answer. It surprises you the first time you see it. Romance on the rails. You'd always imagined the hobo world as all grit and grit alone, patched clothes, tin cups, bruised knuckles. But one evening, in a jungle outside Kansas City, you notice a woman sitting by the fire, her hair tied back with a bright red scarf that catches the glow like a flame. Beside her, a young man strums a guitar, eyes never leaving hers as he sings some half-aid ballad about wandering and finding love in unlikely places. You can't help but smir. Even here, with hunger gnawing and bulls prowling, sparks still fly. Romance on the road wasn't common, but it wasn't impossible either. Women traveled the rails too, alone, with children, or sometimes with partners. The hardships didn't erase the human need for tenderness, for companionship. A stolen glance, a shared meal, or a walk along the tracks could feel like gold when everything else was rust. And hobos even claimed that a kiss around a jungle fire was worth more than a day's pay because it reminded them they were still human. Here's the historical fact. While the majority of hobos were men, women did make up a small but significant percentage of the traveling population. Some estimates put the number at around 5–10%. Women rode the rails for the same reasons men did. Job loss, eviction, broken families, but faced double the dangers. Stories survive of female hobos disguising themselves as men for safety, binding their hair and lowering their voices just to blend in. Now, for the quirky side, a few hobos swore by hobo weddings. These weren't official ceremonies, of course, but improvised unions sealed by sharing food, swapping trinkets, or simply declaring loyalty in front of witnesses. Sometimes they lasted only until the next train pulled out. Other times, couples rode together for years, their love stitched tighter than their patched clothes. Jungle gossip claimed you could tell a hobo couple by the way they shared chores. She stirring the pot, he tending the fire, though the roles weren't always so fixed. Scholars debate how much of this romance was real and how much was romanticized after the fact. Were these relationships genuine bonds forged in hardship, or were they exaggerated tales told later to soften the grim image of the Depression? Some argue that women hobos were often erased from the historical record, their stories hidden behind stereotypes of male wanderers. Others caution against over-romanticizing gifts, pointing out that danger and exploitation were never far behind. Watching that red-scarfed woman laugh at the guitar player's clumsy rhyme, you feel both truths humming beneath the moment. Tenderness exists, but it's fragile, risky, fleeting. Later, as the night deepens, you catch snippets of conversation from the couple. They dream aloud of finding steady work in California, or maybe even settling down. The others listen with a mix of envy and amusement. "Love don't fill your belly," one man mutters, though his eyes soften as he watches them. Even cynics crave what they claim doesn't matter. As you lie back, the guitar still faintly strumming, you wonder what it would be like to have someone beside you on the road. Not just for survival, but for warmth of a different kind. Maybe you'd share more than stew and stories. Maybe you'd share the weight of the hunger, the fear, the endless miles. Out here, romance is a gamble with stakes higher than any poker game. But for some, the risk is worth it. For now, you pull your blanket tighter and drift to sleep with the tune of that makeshift love song echoing in your ears. Your stomach isn't the only thing that suffers on the road. Tonight, as you sit by the fire, an older hobo wheezes beside you, coughing so hard it rattles his whole frame. No doctors are coming to this jungle. Out here, sickness is treated with whatever knowledge, superstition, or scraps of medicine a man can scourge. They call them hobo doctors, not professionals, but wanderers who've picked up tricks from farm wives' old manuals or sheer trial and error. One such doctor, a wireman with spectacles missing one lens, digs into a sack and pulls out a bundle of dried herbs. He brews them into a bitter tea, swearing it'll settle the cough. Another hobo, skeptical but desperate, gulps it down, grimacing as though he's swallowed fire. Within an hour, the coughing quiets, though whether it's the tea or sheer luck, nobody can say. Still, the doctor earns a reputation, and by morning men are lining up for advice about blisters, cuts, and aching teeth. Here's a historical anchor. During the Great Depression, access to medical care plummeted. Clinics were overwhelmed, hospitals often turned away those who couldn't pay, and hobos had even less chance of treatment. Folk medicine became the default. Home remedies passed along from camp to camp. Some used onion pickuses for infections, mustard plasters for chest pain, or turpentine mixed with sugar for stomach troubles. Primitive, yes, but sometimes better than nothing. And here's the quirky side. Hobos sometimes believed in charms and rituals as much as herbs. One man swore by carrying a rabbit's foot for good health. Another claimed rubbing tobacco juice on wounds sped healing. There were even whispered cures involving railroad grease, though nobody ever seemed eager to demonstrate. It wasn't science, it was hope stitched together with whatever scraps the road provided. But scholars debate how effective these cures really were. Some argue that folk remedies preserved valuable traditions, especially those rooted in indigenous or immigrant knowledge. Others dismiss them as dangerous quackery, noting that untreated infections or illnesses often proved fatal. The question lingers, were hobos resourceful healers or victims of desperation forced to gamble their lives on guesswork? Watching the so-called doctor mix another foul-smelling concoction, you suspect the truth lies somewhere in between. One night, fever grips you hard. Your body shakes, sweat soaking your patched shirt. The jungle doctor presses a rag dipped in vinegar to your forehead and mutters that it'll draw out the heat. You choke down his bitter tea, half convinced it'll kill you faster. But by morning, the fever breaks, and you're sitting up, weak but alive. The men cheer softly, as if survival itself deserves applause. Maybe it was the tea. Maybe it was your body finally winning its own battle. Either way, you live to ride again. Around the fire, the men trade their own folk remedies. One insists garlic cloves cure anything from toothaches to heartbreak. Another swears that rubbing whiskey on sore feet makes them stronger. You chuckle, but you file the tips away. You never know when desperation will make you try them. The jungle becomes not just a kitchen or a tavern, but a clinic where survival knowledge is passed along like recipes. That night, lying under your blanket, you feel grateful not just for stew or fire, but for the strange ragtag doctors of the road. They may not have diplomas or sterile tools, but they've kept men alive with nothing more than weeds, spit, and stubborn faith. And in a world where a cough can be a death sentence, that's a kind of medicine no hospital ledger can measure. The freight train groans into motion. And tonight, you're not inside a boxcar. You're clinging underneath it, pressed against the steel beams like a barnacle on a whale. This trick is called riding the rods, and it's as dangerous as it sounds. Your body shakes with every jolt, the cold iron cutting into your palms. Sparks spit from the wheels inches away from your boots. You know one slip won't mean a bruise or a chase from a bull. It'll mean being ground into the tracks, forgotten before dawn. The reason you're down here instead of inside: bulls have gotten sharper. Boxcars are locked, doors chained, and guards patrol like wolves. The underside is the only option if you want to keep moving. You hear the whistle howl, the engine roaring forward, and the vibration rattles through your bones. Each second stretches into eternity as you cling harder, eyes watering from the wind and grit. You tell yourself you'll let go at the next slow siding, but part of you knows you'll push further, because hunger always pushes further. Here's the historical fact. Riding the rods was one of the most common yet most lethal methods hobos used to travel. The rods were the narrow supports beneath freight cars, barely wide enough for a man to lie flat. Thousands attempted it. Thousands died when fatigue, wind, or sudden jolts knocked them loose. Newspapers of the era carried grim accounts of bodies found along tracks, nameless drifters who gambled and lost. Yet despite the danger, the practice endured, because there was no cheaper ticket than free. Now for the quirky side, hobos developed a sort of grim humor about it. Some bragged about first-class rods, the smoother beams under certain train models. Others joked about rod insurance, a bottle of whiskey to calm the nerves before crawling underneath. There were even tales of men napping while riding the Ross, though you suspect that's more legend than fact. Still, the humor softened the terror, making the deadly ride feel like another shared joke in the brotherhood. Scholars debate what this practice symbolizes. Was it recklessness, proof that hobos flirted with death out of desperation? Or was it ingenuity, a raw demonstration of human adaptability under crushing circumstances? Some call it tragic folly, others call it courage. As your muscles burn and your fingers cramp, you feel both interpretations alive in your shaking body, foolishness and bravery holding hands in the dark. Hours stretch on. Your ears ring with the constant metallic roar and your teeth chatter so hard you fear they'll crack. You press your cheek against the cold beam, praying the train slows soon. When it finally does, you roll onto the gravel, trembling. Your clothes torn and your arms raw from gripping steel. The train shrieks past, indifferent, while you collapse on your back, staring at the stars. You're alive, though you can't quite believe it. Later, by the fire, you describe the ride to others. They nod with solemn respect. No laughter this time. Everyone here has ridden the rods at least once, and everyone knows a friend who didn't make it. The silence that follows feels heavier than any story. Riding the rods isn't an adventure. It's a gamble with the reaper. And somehow tonight you walked away with your skin intact. As you close your eyes, the memory won't fade. The iron beams, the roaring wheels, the black wind tearing at your body, it replays in your head, sharp and vivid. You know you'll probably do it again because survival leaves little choice. But deep inside, you also know that every time you crawl under a train, you're bargaining with death. And death always keeps the better hand. The road doesn't just belong to lone wanderers. Sometimes it belongs to whole families. You see them first on a dusty highway in Oklahoma. Their jalopy piled high with pots, blankets, and a mattress strapped to the roof. Kids dangle their legs from the back, hair tangled with dust, eyes too old for their faces. These are the children of the Dust Bowl, refugees of wind and drought, drifting westward in search of work and dignity. Their story runs parallel to yours, but with heavier stakes. They can't slip under a train car and vanish. They carry their whole world with them. When you share a camp with them one night, the difference becomes clear. The father chops wood while the mother stirs a pot of thin stew, trying to stretch it so 6 mouths can taste something. The children sit cross-legged, staring at the pot as if willing it to multiply. You notice their clothes patched like yours, but smaller, sadder somehow. Hunger on a grown man's face looks rugged. On a child's it looks cruel. Here's the historical fact. By the mid-1930s, more than 200,000 people fled the Dust Bowl states. Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, and Arkansas, heading mostly to California. They were dubbed Oaks regardless of their true origin, and many wound up in migrant camps picking fruit or cotton. John Steinbeck immortalized them in The Grapes of Wrath. But before literature claimed their story, they lived it daily with no guarantee of tomorrow's bread. Now the quirky detail. Despite their poverty, some families turned their jalopies into rolling palaces of ingenuity. You'd see stoves welded to bumpers, chicken coops tied to fenders, or entire water barrels lashed on top. Kids sometimes rode in crates bolted to the sides, laughing at the wind as if it were a carnival ride. Survival demanded creativity, and these families became traveling engineers, making machines out of scrap and hope. Scholars debate how much solidarity existed between hobos and these families. Were they part of the same community of the dispossessed, or did differences in circumstance set them apart? Some accounts suggest hobos often helped families, sharing food or watching children while parents hunted work. Others hint at tension with families resenting single men who were seen as competition for scarce jobs. Watching the family at your camp, you sense both dynamics at play. Compassion tempered by the grim fact that too many hungry mouths can make allies into rivals. One evening you share your bread with the youngest child, the girl with braids and sharp eyes. She smiles, showing a missing tooth, and for a fleeting second the road feels less cruel. But then her mother thanks you with a weary nod, and you see the weight in her gaze, gratitude wrapped around exhaustion, the look of someone who's been strong too long. When the family drives away at dawn, their jalopy rattling like it might fall apart on the first hill. You feel the emptiness they leave behind. You know you'll keep moving light, your belongings tied to a bindle. But their image will ride with you. Children on the road remind you of the stakes, of the thin line between survival and collapse. They prove the Depression wasn't just a tale of wandering men. It was a saga that dragged whole generations across dust rails and broken highways. That night, staring into the fire, you hear one of the older hobos mutter, "Kids shouldn't have to ride the road." No one answers. Everyone just stares at the flames, knowing Selness is the only truth big enough to hold that thought. You walk into a city expecting bright lights and opportunity, but instead you find a sprawl of shacks stitched together from tar paper, tin scraps, and whatever else people can scavenge. Smoke curls lazily from barrel fires, children chase each other barefoot through mud, and the air smells of woodsome smoke, garbage, and desperation. This is a Hooverville, one of the shanty towns that mushroomed across America during the Great Depression. Named with bitter sarcasm after President Hoover, these makeshift villages became the gathering places of the forgotten, where hobos, jobless families, and displaced workers cobbled together lives out of debris. You step carefully down a dirt path between shacks. A man hammers flattened tin cans into his roof, while his wife stirs a pot balanced on 3 bricks. The pot smells like cabbage water with maybe a bone tossed in. Children peer at you with cautious eyes, their faces smudged with soot. It looks less like a neighborhood, and more like a city made of ghosts, each shack a monument to lives erased by banks and dust. Here's the historical anchor. Hooverville sprang up in nearly every major city during the Depression. Seattle, Chicago, New York. Each had sprawling settlements, often on public land or riverbanks. They were rarely sanctioned, sometimes bulldozed by police, but they always rose again because the need didn't vanish. They weren't lawless chaos either. Many had self-appointed mayors, rules against stealing, and makeshift services like barber chairs or communal kitchens. Survival demanded order, even in a world built from scraps. Now for the quirky detail, some residents injected humor into the bleakness. They gave ironic names to their shacks. The Ritz Palace Hotel scrolled proudly on warped wood, some decorated walls with calendars or newspaper clippings. creating homes out of fragments of normal life. There were even makeshift churches and tiny theaters where someone might strum a guitar or recite poetry. Poverty didn't erase the human itch for art or laughter. It just forced it into new shapes. But scholars debate what Hoovervilles represented. Were they symbols of resilience? Evidence that people could build community even in the harshest times? Or were they evidence of systemic collapse, the state's failure to protect its citizens? Some historians argue they were both tragic proof of neglect, yet also living demonstrations of human adaptability. As you stand in the middle of the shanty town, the weight of both interpretations presses on you. It feels like standing in a museum of survival. Every shack a stubborn protest against oblivion. You're invited to sit by a barrel fire where a family shares what little they have. Thin soup ladled into tin cans. The taste is weak but warming, and the simple act of being offered food touches you deeply. Around the fire, conversations range from bitter jokes about Hoover to whispered rumors of jobs on the other side of town. Hope flickers here, fragile as the flames, but it's hope all the same. At night, the Hooverville glows with dozens of tiny fires, each one a small declaration. We are still here. You lie down on a borrowed blanket inside a shack with walls to you so thin you can see the stars through the gaps. The wind whistles, rattling the tin roof, but you're not alone. The murmur of voices, the laughter of children, and the soft clang of someone hammering late into the night weave into a lullaby. As sleep creeps in, you realize this place is more than a shelter. It's a reminder that even when stripped of everything, money, land, security, people still build, share, and dream. The shacks may look fragile, but the spirit inside them is anything but. By the time you roll into Chicago, you've heard whispers of a place the hobos call Hoboya. It isn't marked on any official map, but every wanderer knows where to find it. The area around the West Madison Street Skid Row. The sidewalks are crowded with men in patched coats, sitting on stoops, swapping rumors, and scratching chalk symbols onto posts. Coffee houses reek of tobacco smoke, while flop houses advertise a bed for a nickel if you're lucky. If the jungles are small fires in the woods, Hobemia is the capital city of the road. You drift into a cheap diner where the clatter of plates mixes with the drone of conversation. Every table is filled with wanderers like you, their voices low but animated. One man leans over his coffee, muttering about job leads in the stockyards. Another talks about a generous church nearby. Someone else scribbles notes on a scrap of paper, like he's charting a map of survival. It feels less like a diner and more like a parliament of the dispossessed. Here's the historical anchor. Chicago truly was the beating heart of hobo culture during the Depression. The city's railroads made it a hub for travelers, while Skid Row offered cheap lodging, soup kitchens, and gathering places. It was in Chicago that sociologists began studying hobos seriously, documenting their slang, rituals, and networks. For a brief time, the hobo became more than just a shadow figure. He became a subject of academic fascination. Now for the quirky side, Hobemia had its own culture that blurred into performance. Hobos gave speeches on corners, reciting poetry or railing against the government. Some even staged mock trials or impromptu debates in flophouses. One famous spot, Bug House Square, became a soapbox arena where anyone could stand and argue philosophy, politics, or religion to a rowdy crowd of wanderers and locals alike. Imagine it, a man with holes in his boots debating capitalism versus socialism under a street lamp. His audience a mix of professors, vagabonds, and curious kids. But scholars debate whether Hobemia was truly a community or just a temporary crossroads. Was it an actual cultural capital with identity and solidarity? Or was it merely a symptom of urban poverty clustering together? Some argue it gave hobos dignity, a place where they weren't outcasts but citizens of their own republic. Others insist it was nothing more than a slum romanticized in hindsight. As you sip your watery coffee and listen to the chatter, you sense it's both, a place born of desperation, yet brimming with life and meaning. You wander the streets that evening, watching as neon signs flicker against the shadows. A street preacher bellows warnings of sin, while a fiddler plays a quick tune nearby. Men cluster in alleys, some swapping advice, others just staring into space. Despite the hardship, the air buzzes with energy, an undercurrent of survival and defiance. This isn't a graveyard. It's a hidden city alive in its own ragged way. When night falls, you curl into a bunk in a flophouse, the smell of sweat and tobacco thick in the air. The man in the bed beside you snores loudly, muttering now and then about trains and lost towns. As you close your eyes, you think about Hobhemia, not as a place of shame, but as proof of something remarkable. Even when stripped of home and money, people create a society out of scraps. A capital for the wandering stitched together from hunger, talk, and stubborn human need. The farther you travel, the more you realize that the road isn't just filled with hungry bellies. It's also thick with voices, each one eager to spin wisdom, preach salvation, or simply tell a tale taller than a grain silo. Around a campfire one evening, a wiry man with a beard down to his chest begins reciting verses of poetry, his voice low and hypnotic. He calls himself the Bard of the Rails, and his words flow like water over stone, describing sunsets on boxcars and the loneliness of the road. The others nod, soothed, as though he's casting a spell. Not long after, another figure bursts into the circle, Bible clutched tight, eyes burning with zeal. He paces like a caged animal, declaring that salvation is the only true bread. Some men roll their eyes, others listen earnestly. Out here, even preachers ride the rails, swapping pulpits for boxcars. And then there are the prophets, not men of scripture, but visionaries of the road, claiming they've seen a future where hobos rise up and form their own nation. Their voices carry half-mad conviction. But in a world where certainty has collapsed, even madness can sound like hope. Here's the historical anchor. During the Depression, hobos were notorious for gathering storytellers, poets, and preachers in their ranks. Some were educated men who'd lost jobs. Others were natural performers. In Chicago's Bughouse Square and hobo jungles alike, speeches and poetry became common. Oral tradition was a lifeline. Not just entertainment, but a way to pass on lessons, keep spirits alive, and preserve culture. Now for the quirky fact, some hobos carried hobo poetry books, tattered notebooks filled with verses copied from each other or invented on the spot. Others carved poems into boxcar walls, turning train cars into traveling libraries of scratchy script. And preachers. Some were sincere, but others and boys were more opportunistic men who learned that quoting scripture could win you meals just as easily as begging. Imagine a sermon ending not with an altar call, but with the preacher asking if anyone had bread to spare. Scholars argue about those voices by the fire. Were they just diversions to pass a hard night, or something deeper, a cultural backbone that gave the hobo world identity and dignity? Some say the poets and preachers of the rails belong to a larger tradition of working-class art. Long ignored for its rough edges, others warn that many tales were stretched thin, their power inflated by nostalgia. But in the circle of firelight, their words matter more than the footnotes admit. The preacher finishes, sweat shining on his brow. A poet cuts in with a quick, wicked rhyme about stew, and the whole camp bursts into laughter. The mood flips from solemn to playful in a heartbeat, proof these voices don't compete. They complete one feed's meaning, one beauty, one laughter. Later, bedded down beside a dying ember, you replay the lines in your head. The road isn't silent, however much the world pretends not to hear it. It's full of verses, proclamations, and jokes, ringing off the rails like sermons in a cathedral of iron and sky. Whether they change anything big is up for debate. They change you in the moment, and that's enough. Weeks pass, and a question dogs your heels like a shadow. Are you free or just desperate? At sunset, perched on the lip of a boxcar. Wind in your face, it feels like freedom. No boss, no rent, no clock. You can step off anywhere, change course on a rumor. But when your stomach growls loud enough to drown the rhythm of the wheels, freedom tastes a lot like hunger. Around the fire, the debate flares. A gray-bearded hobo jabs a spoon at the stars. This is the last frontier of liberty, he declares. We're kings out here. Another man spits into the dirt. Kings don't beg bread. This ain't freedom. It's desperation in disguise. Silence follows as everyone stares into the stew, as if the answer might bubble up. Historically, hobos wrestled with that dual identity. Some claimed a chosen independence, refusing a society that had failed them. Others admitted necessity, unemployment, eviction, bad luck. Language tried to sort it. Hobos as workers on the move, tramps as wanderers dodging work, bums as men stuck with no drive, but lived experience blurred the lines daily. A quirky twist. Some leaned so hard into the freedom myth they recast themselves as knights of the road, tales of heroic boxcar rides, daring duels with bulls, romances under the stars. One man toted a battered chess set and crowned himself king of the open board, hustling matches at every jungle. Half performance, half belief, desperation rewritten as dignity. Scholars still split. Was this a real counterculture, or survival dressed in poetry and swagger? Maybe the answer turns with your luck. Under a vast sky, you feel freer than any banker behind locked doors. But when emptiness knots your gut, the road has shackles of its own. Perhaps freedom and desperation are the same coin here, flipping with every mile. The road makes characters of men. Real names fade in the smoke. You meet Freight Yard Slim, Oklahoma Tom Two Socks Joe. Nicknames aren't just jokes. They're gear, tools you carry when you've got nothing else. Yours arrives after you trip over a camp kettle and baptize your boots in stew. Laughter rolls. By morning, you're Stewfoot. It stings, then sticks, then feels like a badge. You belong. Historically, nicknames anchored men in the culture. Dakota Dan, Banjo Pete, Sleepy Jim. They shed the weight of old debts and dead ends, letting a man start fresh. Tall tales tangled around those names like vines, outrunning a bull for 10 miles, riding the rods through 3 states, cooking legendary stew, strumming an invisible guitar, wrestling a raccoon for dinner. Truth mattered less than the laughter. Exaggeration turned misery into something worth repeating. Scholars debate escapism or true culture-making, coping mechanism or oral tradition as rich as sailors' yarns and cowboy ballads. By the fire you don't care. You feel laughter rise out of hunger, and no stories can feed what food can't. Railroad Johnny swears he once rode a freight backward through a blizzard, steering it like a sleigh. Howls greet the claim. Nobody asks for proof. The story is the proof. Another man tells of a long war with the farmers, goose that escalated into ambush and counter-ambush. You laugh until your ribs arc and realize the road is as much this ridiculous, defiant joy as it is bread or work. That night, you whisper your name, Stewfoot absurd, solid yours, out here. The world strips away money, home pride, then hands back a legend. By the late 1930s, a new rumor sifts into jungles and flophouses. War. Men hunch over diner papers left on counters, tracing headlines. Hitler, Mussolini, ships prowling like sharks. For those who've survived on the edge, the talk tastes like dread and opportunity. World War I veterans, medals tucked in tobacco tins, rasp warnings about gas and mud, half caution, half invitation. Younger men listen, hungry for a purpose that isn't just chasing jobs. For the invisible, the army sounds like a way to be seen, to trade rags for uniforms and boxcars for barracks. Historically, the looming war became a turning point. Many hobos enlisted or were drafted. Steady meals, pay, clothes, luxuries after lean years. Mobilization would pull millions into factories and barracks, helping snap the back of the Depression. For hobos, the road itself began to fade, a quirky flourish. Long before America entered the fight, some joked about a hobo army, bindles for rifles, jungle stew in helmets. Hobo code chalked on enemy walls, absurd and yet true at the core. War looked like another road, another gamble for survival. Scholars still ask, eager volunteers or reluctant draftees? Patriotism or necessity? Maybe both. In one Chicago jungle, Colorado Jim stands and says he's enlisting. Some clap his back. Others mutter about swapping cages. Jim shrugs. Better a cage with meals than no cage at all. His words hang in the smoke. You stare at the stars and feel the rails shifting under your boots. The years roll forward and the road thins. Factories hum. Fields hire. Men who warmed their hands at jungle fires now queue at employment offices, trading patched coats for fresh work shirts. The rails remain, but fewer ride them. You notice first in the quiet jungles, cold fire rings, rusting cans, no guitar buzz. Some men marched to war, some found jobs, some never made the turn. The brotherhood that once crowded the tracks begins to feel like a ghost town. Historically, by the early 40s, the hobo era was in decline. War mobilization and recovery pulled men from the rails. The culture didn't vanish. Brit, Iowa's convention, the stories, the songs, but its golden age ended with the Depression. Quirky afterlife. Hobos lingered in folklore. Boxcar Willie. King of the road, Halloween costumes with painted stubble. The symbol of poverty softened into nostalgia, a charm detached from hunger. Scholars argue how to remember them, tragic victims of collapse or pioneers of resilience, the cold nights, the empty plates, or the humor, the codes, the fellowship. The truth is both. The hobo story lives in the gray, where survival actually happens. You take one last ride, leaning in the doorway as wind scours your face. Fields shine green. Farmers wave from tractors. Towns buzz with work instead of worry. Joy and melancholy share the seat beside you. The world is healing, and the road that made you is disappearing. At the station, you step down, gravel crunching under your boots. For the first time in years, you don't know your next stop, only that the rails no longer own you. The journey that began in boxcars and broken dreams ends with something steadier. The road left scars and stories, and a kind of pride. The jungles may go quiet, but their fires keep burning in memory, crackling in every tale told by those who lived without a dollar and survived with something stronger. Grit, so here we are, rails gone quiet, jungle fires banked to ash. You've walked the track from clatter and chalk marks and thin stew to the hush of recovery. It's strange to loosen the bindle and learn the road itself can end, but history doesn't vanish. It lingers in echoes, every folk tune about the open road, every kid in a hobo costume, every story of a chalk mark that meant kind lady here. The ember glows. Hobos were more than drifters. They were survivors, teachers, storytellers. Proof you can live with wit, grit, and the kindness of strangers. Not comfortably, not glamorously, but live. They balanced on the thin line between despair and hope, and somehow kept their footing tonight. Safe from bulls and bitter winters, listen for the rhythm of the rails anyway. Soft and steady, like a lullaby from a boxcar under a star-stitched sky. Sleep easy. This journey is done for now. Tomorrow, there are always new tracks. Take a moment to let go of everything around you. Close your eyes gently. Inhale deeply. Feel your chest rise. Hold it for a second, and now slowly exhale. Let your shoulders drop. Let your body soften. With every breath, you are drifting into calm. Nothing else matters right now. Just your breath, your peace, your stillness.